Next, I am honored to welcome for this morning's keynote speaker, Omer Kanat, Executive Director of the Uyghur Human Rights Project. His full bio is accessible online, but a few highlights. Mr. Kanat is also Executive Committee Chairman of the World Uyghur Congress. He co-founded the Uyghur Human Rights Project in 2003 and the Congress in 2004. Mr. Kanat regularly meets with members of U.S. Congress to brief them on Uyghur human rights and policy responses, and has testified before the Senate Human Rights Caucus and the U.S. Atrocity Early Warning Task Force. He has published op-eds for multiple media outlets, and his comments and interviews have been featured by PBS NewsHour, The New York Times, The Washington Post, CNN, Al Jazeera, Foreign Policy, Politico, and Radio Free Asia, among others. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Omer Kanat.
Good morning, everybody. I am honored to be here and speaking at this stage. And I want to warmly condemn the University of South Florida and GNSI for convening this critical forum. For more than 20 years, Uyghurs living in democratic world have faced violation of civil and political rights guaranteed to them by the democratic governments at the hand of the Chinese government. In other words, China's repression extends well beyond its borders. The persecution of Uyghurs, which since 2016 and 17 has been part of a policy of genocide, is a worldwide campaign. Even non-Uyghurs who speak up against the genocide are increasingly targeted by this campaign, threatening their freedom and individual rights. While the overseas repression has been in place for decades, I wish to point out that the Urumqi massacre of July 2009 was a terrible turning point in the fate of the Uyghur people. It started with a peaceful march in the capital of our homeland, Urumqi, to demand justice for murdered Uyghurs by a Chinese mob in a factory in Guangdong. The police response was brutal. Within a few weeks, thousands of young Uyghurs disappeared into police custody and were never heard from again. That was the turning point. After that, Chinese government policies became militarized and even more brutal. And a few years later, in 2016, the mandatory DNA collection and initial roundups began. By March 17, 2017, the concentration camps began to be filled up with up to 3 million people in the initial sweeps. Since the mass roundups began in 2017, any Uyghur in a foreign country who went home was arrested as soon as they arrived at the airport. It did not matter if they went for a family visit, to take care of sick parent, or for the business. The police put black hoods over their heads at the airport and took them away to a prison camp. Therefore, Uyghurs cannot go home. This is why there is a refugee crisis in countries where people are not safe from extradition or deportation to China, where they will be locked up and tortured. Even worse, the Chinese government did not just arrest Uyghurs who went home, it pursues them in foreign countries. UHRP, my organization, published its first report documenting the Chinese government's intimidation of Uyghurs overseas 13 years ago in 2011. Since then, we have published a total of 12 reports urgently calling attention to the growing campaign of Chinese government pressure on other countries to deport Uyghurs, and thousands of cases of direct action by PRC diplomats, police, and agents on the soil of other countries. One of our reports was a 62-page report published in June 2021 called No Space Left to Run. The report documented that Uyghurs around the world continue to be targeted by Chinese government pressure on the immigration and security forces of many countries. The report was based on a data set of 1,546 cases of serious human rights violation on foreign soil over a 24-year period, from 1997 to 2021. This data set gave critical insight into the scope and evolution of the Chinese government's long-standing efforts to control and repress Uyghurs across sovereign borders. In 1997 and 2007, at least 89 Uyghurs from 9 countries, primarily in South and Central Asia, were detained and deported to China. In 2008 and 2013, at least 130 Uyghurs from 15 countries experienced serious abuses. Most recently, from 2014 through March 2021, a total of 1,327 individuals were detained and deported from 20 countries. While China's transnational repression of the Uyghurs has lasted for decades, the campaign increased dramatically when the genocidal policies began. Let me give just one example. In 2017, Egyptian police broke into apartments, scored airports, and raided restaurants and mosques. They were not looking for Egyptian political dissidents, but were hunting for Uyghurs on behalf of the Chinese government. More than 200 Uyghurs, mostly young students at universities in Cairo, were rounded up, and an unknown number are confirmed to have been rendered or deported to China. Interview data suggests that Chinese police were present in Egypt during interrogation, showing Beijing's increasing willingness to intervene in the internal affairs partner countries. In total, over the past 20 years, 28 countries, including US allies, have arrested or deported Uyghurs at the request of the Chinese government. It is critical that US policymakers develop an effective strategy that includes other states' cooperation with China's transnational repression. No Uyghur have been deported to China from democratic countries for at least 5 years. But other acts of transnational repression in democracies remain very serious. In November 2021, UHRP issued a follow-up report titled, "Your Family Will Suffer: How China is Hacking, Surveilling, and Intimidating Uyghurs in 22 Liberal Democracies." The new research added 5,530 instances of Stage 1 transnational repression spanning 19 years and 22 countries. Stage 1 transnational repression includes warnings and threats to individuals and family members, and arrest requests issued bilaterally or through international organizations such as Interpol. Cases of intimidation and harassment often go unreported, suggesting that the number of cases and number of Uyghurs facing harassment may be much higher. In short, the scale of China's transnational repression of Uyghurs is breathtaking, from the rendition of individuals to the everyday online threats. There is no peace for Uyghurs living overseas. The obvious purpose to control Uyghurs' speech and make sure the blanket of control extends everywhere in the world, and to crush the voices who are speaking out about their relatives who are still disappeared or who have received long prison terms. The purpose is to make sure that the global outrage will die down and stop the campaign for global response to the atrocities. The situation in the United States has become increasingly worse, no, no better, even after Congress and policy analysts have become aware of the situation. My organization published a detailed report about the situation in the United States 5 years ago, before people started using the term of transnational repression. Our 2019 report was titled Repression Across Borders, the CCP's illegal harassment and coercion of Uyghur Americans. It documented how the Chinese government routinely carried out surveillance, threat, and coercion on American soil to control the speech and actions of Uyghur Americans. For the Uyghur American community, the Chinese government maintains a regular presence in their daily life. The threats come by text, chat apps, voicemail, email, and messages delivered by third parties. Some members of the community report receiving such messages as on weekly or even near daily basis. Non-compliance could result in family members being taken to concentration camp. Here are 3 examples from our interviews in 2019. An Uyghur man received a call via PRC's Chinese app, WeChat. It was from an unknown contact who identified himself as a police officer in China. The alleged police officer knew certain information about the man's career, who he worked with, and even his salary in the US. The police officer assured the man that his parents were safe, but threatened that there were others who would imprison them unless he provided information to the Chinese authorities about the Uyghur American community. Another Uyghur received this text message from a police officer. Please don't be a disaster for your loved ones. You better think more about your family members. Finally, a camp survivor received this voicemail from her brother after she spoke to the media and testified before the Congress. How could you do this to your parent, to us? What kind of daughter are you? You should go to the Chinese embassy right away and denounce all the things you said about the Chinese government in the interview you gave to Radio Free Asia, and tell them you love China. Tell them you were pressured by the Uyghur organizations in the US to lie about your detention and torture in the camps, and take back everything you said. Otherwise, China can get you wherever you hide. Our report pointed out that the Chinese government's program of transnational repression is an ambitious and well-resourced campaign affecting all Uyghur Americans, especially the courageous survivors, journalists, activists, and students engaged in raising awareness about the atrocities in their homeland. UHRP also pointed out that the intimidation campaign constitutes an ongoing series of crimes committed with impunity on US persons. It is illegal under US federal and state law to issue threats that interfere with the free speech rights. These communications illustrate the way Chinese agents apply pressure against Uyghurs abroad through their family members at home, adding to the extreme emotional distress of separated Uyghur families. That so many speak out, despite the dire risks, demonstrate the resilience of the Uyghurs in the United States. We arranged meetings with the policy makers and federal law enforcement to urge them to take action. UHRP was pleased to see the US law enforcement took notice. 2 years after we published our analysis of violation on US soil, the FBI issued a document titled Unclassified FBI Counterintelligence Bulletin on Violation of Uyghur Civil Rights on US Soil. This was nearly 4 years ago, in August 2021. About a year later, the FBI finally posted a dedicated page on its website. It is an FBI fact sheet titled Transnational Repression. What is it? How you can get help to stop it. Chinese state pressure placed on Uyghur Americans is also a challenge to the sovereignty of the United States and the authority of the US government to protect the rights of its citizens and legal residents. Like other illegal Chinese government influence operations on US soil, Chinese government harassment and abuse of Uyghurs from California to Virginia should be a US government priority. It is a test of US resolve and impacts all of us, as the limitation of some US citizens' right by a foreign power should be always unacceptable. Our recommendations from 2019 are still urgent. We have testified before congressional committees and commissions on numerous occasions on these issues. We continue to call for serious actions by the United States to provide protection for people who continue to suffer repression even outside China. First, the US needs to ramp up refugee resettlement for victims of the genocide. The US refugee admission program has not admitted any Uyghur since the genocide began, to our knowledge, although the US has been very active in a few individual cases, enabling at least 4 camp survivors to come to the United States on humanitarian parole. But much more must be done to provide a path of safety for several hundred at-risk witnesses who live in countries that do little to protect them from severe harassment and are still at risk of deportation, including in Central Asia, Middle East, and Thailand. Second, the US must do more to restrict the export of surveillance technology, data, artificial intelligence capabilities. Chinese companies supply the surveillance technology for the ongoing slow genocide, including ethnic tracking programs connected to facial recognition. They supply the DNA analysis equipment and software. Third, we need to urgently stop the flow of investment to these companies. Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and venture capital investors, not to mention public pension funds, have shown no initiative to stop. It was a good start when President Biden issued his June 2021 executive order banning US persons from owning stock in several high-profile PRC companies that are assisting the government's surveillance state. But private equity is still totally unrestricted. Fourth, we need to address why the US consumer markets are still a place for profits to be made by PRC companies that are part of the genocide and data collection. It is incredible that many complicit Chinese companies that are already on the US export control list have few restrictions in making profits by selling their products in the US. Dachau and Hikvision surveillance cameras are still for sale on Amazon and eBay. Many are banned by Congress from US military use, but there is nothing done to stop their general sale. Some of their products have been relabeled under US brand names such as Honeywell, and then sold as if they are US products. It is incredible that nothing has been done about PRC drones that are for sale in the US. DJI is the world's largest drone maker and has over 70% of the US consumer drone market. And in 2020, it had over 90% of drones used by public safety agencies in the US. DJI is directly involved in mass surveillance schemes in East Turkestan and has supplied public security agencies with tools to surveil and target Uyghurs and Kazakh and other Turkic people in East Turkestan. Despite marketing in products as tools to save lives and benefit society, DJI is directly facilitating genocidal crimes and should be subject to comprehensive sanctions, including procurement bans, export bans, and investment bans. Retailers should immediately stop selling DJI drones to consumers. In conclusion, it is clear that there is a continued increase in scale and scope of capabilities of China's state-backed hackers and intelligence operatives focused on repression overseas. UHRP's own reports have documented thousands of cases of PRC rights violation on Uyghurs across the Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America over the last 10 years. Democracies must act in decisive and effective policies to ensure the civil liberties of vulnerable communities within their borders. In the case of Uyghurs, we used to have a large community in the US who were, advocating on behalf of their loved ones back home who were taken by the Chinese authorities to the concentration camps. Now, we cannot find many because all of them afraid of Chinese retaliation, afraid of this transnational repression, don't want to be seen in demonstrations, in public events with us. Thank you so much.